With a perfect smile at my 5th anniversary dinner, my mother-in-law raised her glass and introduced my husband's next wife, who was sitting right there at our table. Her one fatal mistake: she chose to stage my public humiliation in a restaurant that I secretly owned. This is the story of how I lost a husband I thought I knew, and in the wreckage found the woman I was always meant to be. Have you ever had a moment so clarifying it changed everything? Let me know in the comments. I'm Ava Monroe, and I invite you to hear what happened next. The soft click of the lipstick case closing was the only sound in the cavernous marble bathroom. I stared at my reflection, a stranger in a familiar form, dressed in a sapphire silk dress that felt more like armor than celebration. 5 years. It felt like a lifetime, and no time at all. I remembered the first anniversary, Liam surprising me with a trip to a rustic cabin upstate, where he'd held my hands and told me my dreams of being a designer were the most exciting thing about his world. His eyes had held a fire, then a conviction that burned away his family's icy skepticism of me, the scholarship kid from the wrong side of the tracks, who had somehow captured their golden boy. Now, that fire was gone, replaced by a polite, distant warmth, like a dying ember you convince yourself is still aflame. I smoothed down the silk over my hips, the memory of our last family brunch coiling in my stomach. Genevieve, my mother-in-law, had tapped a perfectly manicured finger on a page in Architectural Digest. The feature was a sterile beige-on-beige apartment, utterly devoid of personality. "Now that," she had announced, her gaze sweeping over me, "is timeless elegance, dear. It understands its place. It doesn't scream for attention." Liam had just smiled vaguely, adding, "Mom has a great eye." 2 years ago, he would have defended me, praised my visionary use of color and texture. Now my life's work, my soul poured onto blueprints and fabric swatches, was just a nice hobby. I felt myself shrinking every day, my vibrant colors fading to fit the beige box they had built for me. The bathroom door creaked open. Liam stood there, a vision, in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, his tie a perfect silver knot. He smelled of bergamot and expensive apologies. "There you are," he said, his smile both charming and practiced. "Sorry I'm late, Ava. The Henderson deal is just a monster." "It's fine," I replied, my own voice sounding distant. He walked toward me, his eyes scanning my dress. "You look incredible, absolutely stunning." He kissed my cheek, but it was a fleeting, dutiful gesture. "I promised to make it up to you tonight. I pulled some major strings. I got us a reservation at Aria." My heart gave a painful jolt, a dizzying mix of emotions. Pride, fierce and hot because Aria was mine. My secret, my triumph funded by every last dollar my grandfather had left me. And pain, sharp and visceral, because the man standing before me, my husband, was a complete stranger to my greatest accomplishment. Tonight was supposed to be the night. Tucked inside my clutch was a slim, elegantly bound portfolio showcasing Aria's design journey from a derelict warehouse to Boston's most exclusive dining experience. Behind it were the profit and loss statements showing 3 consecutive quarters in the black. I had imagined this moment for months, the look of shock on his face followed by respect, maybe even a flicker of that old fire, a rekindling of the man who had once championed me. "Aria," I managed to say, keeping my voice even, "I hear it's impossible to get into." "Not for me," he said with a wink, the easy confidence of a man born into privilege. "Happy anniversary, babe." The ride to the restaurant was filled with his chatter about the Henderson deal, about market projections, about Hayes Corp. I nodded and smiled, my hand clutched tightly around my purse, the portfolio inside feeling like a lead weight. When we arrived, the entrance to Aria was discreet, marked only by a single glowing lantern. It was exactly as I had designed it, understated, elegant, promising a world of wonders within. The hostess, a sharp young woman named Sarah, whom I had hired myself, greeted us. Her professional smile was perfect, but her eyes met mine for a split second, filled with a subtle, questioning look. "Is he with you tonight for the reveal?" they seemed to ask. I gave her the faintest shake of my head, a silent signal. "Change of plans." Sarah led us through the main dining room. The ambiance was a symphony I had conducted myself, the low, golden lighting, the soft strains of a live jazz trio, the contented hum of conversation from Boston's elite. We were led to the best table in the house, a secluded corner booth I called the Nook, offering a panoramic view of the entire space, and there waiting for us was my personal nightmare. Genevieve Hayes sat at the head of the table, regal and predatory in Chanel. Beside her, my father-in-law Robert with his perpetually disappointed expression, and across from them, Liam's younger brother Ethan, and a young woman I vaguely recognized from a Hayes Corp holiday party, Chloe Vance. Genevieve's smile was as sharp as a shard of glass. "Darling," she purred, extending a cheek for a kiss I didn't want to give. "You didn't think we'd let you celebrate all alone, did you? An anniversary is a family affair?" I looked at Liam. He had the decency to look flustered. "Mom, I thought we discussed," he started. "It was a miscommunication. I wanted it to be just us, but, you know." He trailed off helplessly. Oh, I knew. This was no miscommunication. This was an ambush. A power play on my anniversary in my restaurant. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. Dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Genevieve held court, her every word a carefully aimed dart. She lauded Chloe's recent achievements on a new development project. "It's such a comfort," Genevieve said, looking at me, to have someone with a solid business acumen in Liam's corner. Someone who understands that a legacy is built on assets, not artistic temperaments. Robert remained stoic, nodding at his wife's pronouncements. Ethan, bless his heart, looked deeply uncomfortable. "Ava," he said, trying to change the subject, "I saw the new exhibit at the ICA. The use of light reminded me of some of your early work. Did you get a chance to see it?" Before I could answer, Genevieve cut in smoothly. "Oh, Ethan, don't bore Ava with galleries. We were just talking about the future of Hayes Corp. Chloe has such a clear vision for expansion." I felt pinned to the velvet seat, a butterfly under glass. The portfolio in my clutch now felt like a joke. The dream of sharing my success with my husband shriveled and died with every passive-aggressive comment. Then the climax arrived with the dessert menus. Genevieve, with the dramatic flair of a seasoned actress, tapped her crystal champagne flute with a fork. The soft, tinkling sound silenced the table. "Everyone," she proclaimed, her voice carrying an intentional theatrical weight, "I have a truly wonderful announcement to make." She reached over and placed her hand on Chloe Vance's shoulder. Chloe flinched, her eyes wide, with what looked like genuine horror. "Liam has been working so incredibly hard, dedicating his life to this company." Genevieve continued, her eyes gleaming. "And it is past time he had a partner who can truly support him in all facets of his life. Someone with the right background, the right ambitions, someone who understands the Hayes legacy." She beamed, her gaze locking onto mine, a hunter cornering its prey. "Chloe will make such a wonderful addition to the family, not just as a valued professional, but as the future mother of my grandchildren." The air turned to ice. The subtext wasn't subtext. It was a sledgehammer. Chloe looked down at her plate, her face blood-red with humiliation. Robert Hayes nodded once, a gesture of solemn patriarchal approval. Ethan just stared at me, his expression a mask of pity and disgust. My head turned slowly, mechanically toward Liam. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. "Say something," I pleaded silently. "Shut her down. Defend me. Defend us. Be the man I married." He said nothing. He just stared at the pristine white tablecloth, his jaw tight, his silence a screaming, deafening confession. And in that deafening silence, a sharp crack echoed in the small space. I looked down. The fine crystal water goblet in my hand had shattered under the pressure of my grip. A single elegant shard of glass had sliced deep into my palm. Blood, dark and shockingly vivid, welled up instantly, dripping a perfect crimson tear onto the white linen. The portfolio, the plans, the dream of his pride. It all turned to ash. The presentation I had planned was dead, but a new one was just beginning. I rose to my feet, my movements slow, deliberate. My legs were surprisingly steady beneath me. The entire table stared, mesmerized by the blood and my sudden composure. "Before we toast to Liam's future," I said, my voice shockingly calm, a quiet island in the hurricane raging inside me. I looked past them, all my gaze landing directly on Genevieve Hayes. I have an announcement of my own. I held her gaze, letting the moment stretch. Thank you for choosing my restaurant for this momentous occasion. For a long moment, my words hung in the air, seemingly freezing the very molecules around our table. The tableau of the Hayes family, a portrait of dynastic power just moments before, fractured into confusion. Genevieve's perfectly sculpted smile faltered, twitching at the corner as if short-circuiting. Your restaurant? She finally managed a strange, high-pitched note of disbelief in her voice. She quickly recovered, forcing a condescending little laugh. Oh, Ava, darling, don't be ridiculous. The stress of the evening is clearly getting to you. Beside her, Robert Hayes let out a short, sharp scoff. He didn't even look at me. He looked at Liam, a single disappointed glance that said everything. See, this is what I warned you about. This is what happens when you marry beneath your station. Liam finally tore his eyes from the tablecloth. His face was a pale, bloodless mask of panic. Ava, what are you talking about? He pleaded, his voice low and urgent. Sit down. Please, you're making a scene. A scene, I echoed, and a raw, humorless laugh I didn't recognize as my own escaped my lips. I held up my right-hand palm, open, the blood now a vivid, damning smear. I believe your mother already claimed that honor. My eyes swept past them to the edge of the dining room. My restaurant manager, David, a kind, competent man in his 40s, whom I had personally interviewed and trained, had started moving toward our table. His face was a perfect mask of professional concern, but I saw the alarm in his eyes. I gave him a sharp, almost imperceptible shake of my head. Stay back. Not yet. This was my stage. This was my reckoning. With my left hand, I reached into my clutch, my fingers bypassing the smooth leather of the portfolio that held my dead dream. Instead, I pulled out a single, sleek business card. It was made of thick, matte black cardstock, the lettering a simple, elegant copper foil. With a hand that was shockingly steady, I placed it in the center of the table. It landed with a soft, definitive click. Ava Monroe, I said, and my voice rang with a clarity that felt foreign and exhilarating. Founder and owner, Aria. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer confusion. It was the dawning of a new, impossible reality. Ethan was the first to break the spell. He leaned forward and picked up the card, holding it between his fingers. As an architect, he appreciated its design, its weight. A slow, astonished whistle escaped his lips. I'll be damned, he murmured, his gaze, lifting to meet mine, filled with a sudden electrifying respect. He saw it. He understood. Genevieve, her face contorting with a rage that cracked her sophisticated facade, snatched the card from his hand. She stared at it as if it were coated in poison. This is impossible, she hissed, her voice a low, vicious thing. You don't have the resources, the breeding to create something of this caliber? The insult, so naked and classist, barely registered. It was an old song, and I was finally deaf to it. My grandfather, I said my words as sharp and clean as the glass that had cut me. The man you once referred to at a dinner party as a simple-minded mechanic was a very savvy investor. His inheritance was more than quaint, as you so delicately put it, Genevieve, and I decided to invest it in myself, instead of a new set of pearls to impress your garden club. Every head at the table swiveled to Liam. He was stammering now, his mind frantically trying to connect the dots to rewrite the last 2 years of our life. The late nights, he sputtered. The meetings you said were with design clients. The trips to the city, you lied to me. Lied. My voice dripped with an irony so bitter it could curdle cream. No, Liam, I didn't lie. I created, I built, I succeeded. I let the word hang in the air between us. All while you were busy, what was it again? Oh yes, finding a partner who understands the Hayes legacy. My gaze flickered to Chloe, who looked as if she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. She shrank back in her seat, unable to meet my eyes. I turned back to my husband. The question came out quiet, almost gentle, but it sliced through the tension like a razor. How long, Liam? He flinched physically, recoiling. "Ava, this isn't the time or the place. It's the perfect place." I insisted, my voice gaining strength. "This is my place, built with my money, my vision, my work, the work that you dismissed as a hobby." My voice broke on the last word, the only crack in my composure. I took a breath and forged ahead. "So you will tell me, right here, how long have you been grooming my replacement?" The silence stretched thick and suffocating. Liam's eyes darted around the table, looking for an escape he couldn't find. Finally, a small trembling voice broke the stillness. 6 months, Chloe whispered, her gaze fixed on her lap. Her voice was barely audible. "But he told me you two were drifting. He said the marriage was essentially over." I let out a long, shuddering breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The confirmation was both a gut punch and a key unlocking a cage. It was devastating, and it was liberating. I looked at the stunned faces around the table, the family that had judged me, dismissed me, and now tried to discard me. I gathered my purse, my movements fluid and unhurried. "Well," I said, a strange calm settling over me, "this has been a most illuminating anniversary." I looked at the plates of half-eaten, exquisitely prepared food. "The meal, of course, is on the house. Consider it a parting gift." I stood tall, my clutch in my hand. "Liam," I said, my tone now flat and businesslike, "you'll find your things packed by noon tomorrow. I'll have them sent to your office. Don't. Come to the brownstone." "Ava, wait!" He finally surged to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Wait. We can fix this. It was a mistake. My mother—" I yanked my arm from his grasp, a visceral, primal rejection. My touch left a faint, accusing smear of my own blood on the cuff of his pristine white shirt. "Your mother," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper, "just showed me exactly who you are, Liam, and for the first time, I believe her." I turned my back on him, on all of them, and I walked away. I could feel their eyes on my back, 100 questions burning in the air. I strode through the main dining room, head held high, ignoring the curious glances, the whispered conversations that paused as I passed. David rushed to the door as I approached. "Miss Monroe? Ava? Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice low, with genuine concern. "Everything is perfect, David," I said, giving him a tight, reassuring smile that felt like a lie. "Just handle the Hayes table for me, would you?" The moment I stepped out into the cool, damp Boston night, the composure I had clung to like a life raft finally shattered. I leaned my forehead against the cold, rough brick of my building, and took a ragged, shuddering breath. The city sounds faded to a dull roar. My hand throbbed with a pain that was both distant and immediate. My heart felt like it had been ripped from my chest. But underneath the agony, underneath the betrayal, was something else. Something wild and terrifying and new. It was the exhilarating thrill of being completely unapologetically myself. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers slick with a mixture of blood and nervous sweat. I scrolled to one name, my one true ally, my one port in this hurricane. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Maya," I said, and my voice finally broke the single word carrying the weight of 5 years of silenced pain. "Maya, I need you." Maya's apartment in the South End was everything my brownstone wasn't. Where I had curated warmth with velvets, reclaimed woods, and personal history, Maya had engineered a fortress of logic. Her space was a landscape of cool grays, polished concrete floors, and sharp, minimalist lines of steel and glass. It was an apartment that made no apologies and offered no unnecessary comfort, and right now, it was the only place on earth I wanted to be. I was sitting on a closed toilet lid in her stark white bathroom, a tumbler of amber liquid in my left hand. The scotch burned a welcome trail down my throat. Maya, a vision of composure in navy silk pajamas, was dabbing at my palm with an antiseptic wipe, her movements as precise and efficient as if she were redlining a contract. She didn't offer platitudes. She didn't say it's going to be okay. "So," she said, her voice a low, steady hum as she applied a neat square of gauze. The Botox-injected dragon finally showed her hand, and the golden boy turned out to have a spine made of jelly. She looked up at me, her dark eyes sharp. Honestly, Ava, I'm shocked it took this long. A choked, hysterical sound escaped my throat, something between a sob and a laugh. Maya's bluntness was a bracing welcome tonic after years of syrupy insincerity. The tears I'd been holding back finally came hot and silent, trailing down my cheeks and into the scotch. She did it in front of everyone, Maya. I whispered the words tumbling out in a torrent of pain and disbelief. She had my replacement sitting right there. She called her the future mother of her grandchildren. I recounted the entire horrifying evening, the ambush, Genevieve's verbal daggers, Robert's silent approval, Liam's nothingness. As I spoke, Maya listened with an unnerving stillness, her lawyer's mind working, cataloging every insult, every admission, every fatal misstep the Hayes family had just made. She wrapped my hand with practiced skill, securing the bandage with a firm final press. My phone lying on the cool marble countertop began to buzz, and it didn't stop. It buzzed and lit up again and again, a frantic, desperate beacon from a world I had just exited. Liam. Maya picked it up, her thumb scrolling through the lock screen notifications. She read them aloud in a deadpan voice. Ava, where are you? We need to talk. That was at 10:15 inches, she noted. Followed by, oh, a classic, 10:22. You completely overreacted. You embarrassed me in front of my family. She snorted. Then we have the blame shift at 10:30. My mother shouldn't have said that, but you know how she is. You provoked her by being so distant lately. Her eyes narrowed. And here we go. The grand finale of feigned remorse at 10:41. Ava, please. I miss you. I made a terrible mistake. I love you. She tossed the phone back on the counter as if it were contaminated. Classic narcissist's playbook, she declared, her voice dripping with contempt. He's not sorry he did it, Ava. He's sorry he got caught, and he's terrified of the consequences. She looked at me, her expression hardening with resolve. Turn it off. Don't respond. Don't even read them. Silence is your most powerful weapon right now. Let him sweat. I took another long swallow of scotch, the alcohol doing little to numb the memories that were now flooding the dam I had so carefully constructed for 5 years. I saw Liam not as the coward at the table, but as he was when I first met him. He was sitting on the floor of my tiny, paint-spattered studio apartment, a space so different from his own privileged world, and he was looking at my design sketches with genuine awe. You see the world differently, Ava, he'd said, his voice full of a passion that felt real. You don't just see rooms, you see stories. He was my champion, then defending my bohemian background and impractical dreams against his parents' thinly veiled disapproval. Then, the gradual, insidious shift after the wedding, the slow-motion erasure of me. It started with small things. Genevieve at a dinner I'd meticulously planned, questioning my choice of caterer. A bit rustic, don't you think, dear? She'd murmured. And Liam, who once would have praised my originality, had just shrugged and said, it's different. Then it was my wardrobe, my friends, my charities, each a small strategic cut designed to shape me into a proper Hayes wife. And Liam's defenses grew weaker with each passing month, evolving from a firm, "Mom, that's enough," to a resigned sigh, and finally to complete damning silence. The memory that burned the brightest, the one that felt like the true beginning of the end, was from 2 years ago. My grandfather, my sweet, kind papa, who always smelled of motor oil and sawdust, had passed away, leaving me his life's savings. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to be a seed. At a Sunday dinner at the Hayes mansion, feeling a surge of hope, I'd shared my ultimate dream. I'd love to design and own a small boutique hotel someday, I'd said. Or maybe a restaurant. Genevieve had let out a tinkling, dismissive laugh. Oh, darling, that's sweet. A little project for you. But you should really leave business to the men. She'd turned to Liam. Why don't you let her use that little windfall to redecorate the guest rooms? They could certainly use a refresh. I had looked at Liam, my heart in my throat, praying he would defend that long-ago girl in the paint-spattered studio. Instead, he'd nodded thoughtfully. You know, "That's a good idea, Mom. Less risk, babe. A fun project for you." A fun project. That was it. That was the moment my partnership died. I cried myself to sleep that night, not for Genevieve's insult, but for the loss of the man I thought I had married. The very next day I had called Maya. My voice was hoarse but steady. "I'm going to do it, Maya. I'm going to build something for myself." "Good," she'd said without hesitation. "How can I help?" "He can never know," I'd insisted. "Not him, not any of them, not until it's done, not until I'm so successful that they can't possibly dismiss it." And so began 18 months of a double life. With Maya's legal genius, we created a shell corporation. I spent my weekends scouting not for fabrics, but for real estate, finally finding a struggling restaurant in a forgotten corner of the leather district with perfect architectural bones. I pored over blueprints with a discreet contractor, telling Liam I was working on a demanding freelance gig. I designed every single detail myself, from the custom light fixtures that dripped like molten gold to the heavy textured paper of the menus. I hired David the manager to be the public face, the owner. The lie was a heavy, suffocating burden, but it was also a cocoon. It was the only way I could protect the one part of myself I refused to let them crush. And tonight, they had ripped that cocoon wide open. Back in the sterile white present, I looked around Maya's apartment. It was safe. It was a fortress, but it wasn't mine. I looked at my best friend, my rock. "I can't go back to the brownstone, Maya." I said the words feeling like a vow. "Not for a single night. Not ever." "Good," Maya said, her voice fierce and final as she took my empty glass. She walked to the wet bar in her living room and refilled both our tumblers. "That house was never your home, Ava. It was their embassy." She walked back and handed me the drink, her eyes burning with a protective fire. "Tomorrow," she said, raising her glass, "we don't just pack your bags. We start drafting the terms of your independence." The emotional hangover from the previous night was a dull, heavy ache behind my eyes, but the scotch-fueled tears had dried. In their place was a cold, hard resolve. This chapter of my life wasn't just about heartbreak, it was about survival, and Maya knew the first rule of survival was to get the best general you could find. That's how I found myself walking into the 30th floor downtown offices of Julian Croft. The space was less an office and more a statement of quiet, lethal power. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a panoramic view of the Boston Harbor, the water a brilliant steely blue. The air smelled of expensive leather and ambition. The art on the walls was abstract and imposing. This was a place where fortunes were dismantled and futures were redrafted, and Julian Croft was the architect. Maya had given him the broad strokes over the phone, a professional courtesy between two sharks who swam in the same corporate waters. Julian himself was in his late 50s, dressed in a suit so perfectly tailored it seemed a part of him. He wasn't handsome, but he was compelling, with intelligent, assessing eyes that seemed to see right through to the bottom line of your soul. He listened without interruption as I recounted my story. I told him everything: the early promise of my marriage, Genevieve's slow campaign of psychological erosion, the secret birth of Arya, and the final brutal detonation at the anniversary dinner. My voice was steady, my hands folded neatly on the surface of his massive mahogany desk. When I finished, a heavy silence filled the room, punctuated only by the distant cry of a gull over the harbor. Julian leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "Mrs. Hayes," he began, his voice a calm, deep baritone. "Monroe," I corrected him instantly, the name leaving my lips with a firmness that surprised me. "My name is Ava Monroe." A flicker of something approval, perhaps, crossed his face. "Miss Monroe," he amended smoothly, "your case presents two key elements, the emotional and the financial. The affair, the public humiliation, this is your moral high ground. It is a powerful leverage point for public sympathy should we need it." He paused, letting the weight of his next words land. "But in a no-fault state, like Massachusetts, it's the money that speaks loudest. And your restaurant, Aria, that isn't just an asset, it is your queen on the chessboard." He laid out the grim reality of the battlefield ahead. The Hayes family will not go quietly, he stated, as if discussing the weather. They will fight you, not just for money, but for their reputation, which to people like them is worth more. Genevieve Hayes does not strike me as a woman who tolerates being made a fool of. His eyes held mine. They will try to prove that marital assets were used to fund the restaurant. They will argue that you neglected your duties as a wife to build it. They will try to drag you through the mud, Miss Monroe, until you are too exhausted and too poor to fight back. That is their strategy. The words should have terrified me. Instead, hearing my deepest fears articulated so clinically had the opposite effect. It validated them. It armed me against them. This wasn't a vague, shadowy threat anymore. It was a defined strategy, and a strategy could be countered. The conversation that followed was a sobering, empowering crash course in the art of war. Julian outlined a multi-pronged plan of attack, and with each point, I felt the ground solidifying beneath my feet. First, he said, the paper trail. We need to build an impenetrable fortress around Aria. I want every bank statement, every wire transfer receipt from your grandfather's estate account, every invoice, every incorporation document for your LLC. We will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that not one single penny of marital funds touched that restaurant. Second, he continued, the cease and desist. Liam's frantic texts and calls constitute harassment. The moment he retains counsel, I will draft a formal letter demanding all future communication go through our respective legal channels. We will establish boundaries of iron. And third, he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping slightly, and this is the most important part, we control the narrative. He looked at me intently. The Hayes family thrives on an image of impeccable class and dynastic stability. They will try to paint you as the hysterical, scorned wife. We will not allow that. From this moment on, you are not a victim. You are a brilliant, self-made businesswoman who was betrayed while building her empire in secret. Your ownership of Aria isn't a secret liability to be ashamed of. It is your triumphant origin story. A surge of strength, pure and potent, shot through me. For the first time since the goblet shattered in my hand, I saw a clear path through the wreckage. I wasn't just a heartbroken woman, I was a client, and I had a hell of a case. Meanwhile, across town, a very different conversation was taking place. In the cavernous, oak-paneled library of the Hayes mansion, Liam was facing the full force of his mother's fury. Genevieve, her face a mask of cold rage, paced before the unlit fireplace. You let that little nobody, that designer, make a complete and utter fool of this family? She spat the words sharp as daggers. In her restaurant, do you have any idea the calls I've had to field this morning? The humiliation? Robert Ever the pragmatist sat in a wingback chair swirling a brandy. Your mother is right, Liam. This is a public relations nightmare. The girl has spirit, which makes her dangerous. He took a sip. This needs to be contained immediately. Liam, you will fix this. I don't care how. Seduce her back. Apologize, grovel if you must. We cannot have a messy public divorce. The brand can't sustain it. Liam stood between them, trapped and overwhelmed a puppet whose strings were being pulled in two different directions. The chapter ends with me back at Maya's apartment, the sanctuary of logic. The city lights twinkled outside the vast windows. I had finally tentatively switched my phone back on, silencing the notifications, but morbidly curious. The barrage from Liam had stopped, likely on the advice of whatever high-priced lawyer his father had already called. But there was one new message from a number I recognized but rarely saw. It was from Ethan. The text was short, simple, and felt like a lifeline. Ava, I am so sorry for what happened last night. My mother and brother were completely out of line. If you need anything at all, a witness, a character reference, anything, don't hesitate. You deserved better. My breath hitched. I showed the screen to Maya, who leaned over my shoulder to read it. She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Interesting, she murmured. An ally on the inside. She looked at me. Keep him on side, Ava. We might need him. I stared at the message, a small crack of light in the overwhelming darkness. A complicated, unexpected flicker of gratitude warmed my chest. Julian was right. The battle lines were being drawn. But maybe, just maybe, the sides weren't as clear-cut as I had thought. This was not a home anymore. It was a hostile territory, a beautifully decorated, architecturally significant territory, but hostile nonetheless. Julian Croft, my new general, had arranged it with the precision of a military maneuver. A 2-hour window from 2 to 4 p.m. on a Wednesday, when Liam was scheduled to be in a quarterly board meeting across town. 2 hours to retrieve the pieces of my life from the museum of my own erasure. Maya had immediately volunteered to come with me, ready to stand guard like a Doberman. But as I thought about it, another idea formed a gut feeling I couldn't shake. I pulled out my phone and dialed Ethan. He answered on the second ring. "Ethan, it's Ava," I said, my voice steady. "I have a strange favor to ask." I explained the situation, the 2-hour window, my need to get my things without a scene. He didn't hesitate. "I'll be there," he said simply. "Liam is predictable. He's less likely to play the victim and cause a scene if another family member is present. It disrupts his narrative." He understood. He understood the games, the unspoken rules of his family's warfare. I felt that same complicated gratitude wash over me again. When Ethan's Land Rover pulled up behind my borrowed car on the quiet cobblestone street in Beacon Hill, I felt a sense of calm. He got out dressed in jeans and a gray Henley, looking more like a rugged architect than a haze. He gave me a brief, supportive nod. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be," I replied. Using my key to open the grand black lacquered door felt strange, like I was a trespasser. The air inside was the same, a sterile mix of lemon polish and the faint, cloying scent of the potpourri Genevieve insisted on. The house was silent, a mausoleum of good taste. Every object, every piece of furniture had been chosen to reflect the Hayes legacy. The only room that felt like mine was my studio, the space Liam had always patronizingly called my craft corner. We worked quickly and efficiently, a silent, focused team. Ethan, with his architect's spatial awareness, helped me break down and pack my drafting table and flat file cabinets. He handled my frame design awards with a reverence that made my throat tighten. "I always told Liam you were the real talent in this family," he said, quietly, carefully wrapping a crystal award in bubble wrap. "He has good taste, but you have vision. He just couldn't see past the Hayes Corp letterhead." I worked on the more personal items. I packed my clothes, leaving behind the beige cashmere sweaters Genevieve had bought me and taking the vibrant, jewel-toned pieces I loved. From my jewelry box, I took the pieces from my grandfather and my own mother, leaving the heavy, ostentatious Hayes family heirlooms in their velvet boxes. I was purging my life of their influence, one object at a time. In the back of the guest room closet, I found a box of old photos, me covered in clay, in a college pottery class, my first solo design project, a goofy picture with Maya at our graduation. I had put them away after Liam had commented that they didn't quite fit the aesthetic of the house. I taped the box shut with a grim satisfaction. We were almost done, with just 20 minutes left in our window, when the sound of the front door opening sent a jolt of ice through my veins. "Ava, are you here?" Liam's voice echoed up the grand staircase. Ethan's posture stiffened. He moved to stand slightly in front of me, a subtle protective gesture. "Stay calm," he murmured. "We have every right to be here." Liam appeared in the doorway of the studio. He wasn't in his suit. He was in casual clothes, his hair was a mess, and his eyes were red-rimmed and frantic. He had skipped his board meeting. Of course he had. "Ava," he breathed, his eyes taking in the stacked boxes, my empty closet, and Ethan. His gaze darkened when he saw his brother. "What is he doing here? Running to him now? Are you taking sides?" "I'm on the side of not being an asshole, Liam," Ethan retorted, his voice cool and even. "Ava is here to get her personal property during the time that was legally agreed upon. You are the one who isn't supposed to be here." Liam ignored him completely, his focus entirely on me, his eyes wide with a theatrical desperation. "You can't just do this," he said, stepping into the room. "You can't just move out. This is our home." He picked up a small framed photo of us from my desk from a trip to Italy years ago. "Remember this. Remember how happy we were. I remember." I said, my voice quiet but unyielding, as I continued to place my books in a box. I also remember you sitting at a table in my restaurant last week while your mother announced my replacement. So I think my definition of home has changed. His face crumpled a practiced vulnerability designed to elicit sympathy. It was a mistake, Ava. A terrible, stupid mistake. I was wrong. Okay, I'm sorry. But you're blowing this all out of proportion. You're being emotional. Emotional? I stopped packing and turned to face him fully. You want to see emotional, Liam? No. I think for the first time in 5 years I'm being perfectly logical. I gestured around the room at the boxes at the empty shelves. I'm logically removing myself from a situation that was designed to diminish me. I am logically taking back the parts of my life that I let you and your mother put in storage. The desperation in his eyes curdled into a familiar petulant anger. You think you can just walk away from this family from me, after everything I've given you, this house, this life? The house you inherited and the life you were born into? I challenged, taking a step toward him. What did you give me, Liam? You gave me a standard of living, and in exchange, you took my voice. You took my confidence. You stood by silently while your mother chipped away at me piece by piece. I looked him dead in the eye, the final painful truth rising in my throat. You didn't want a partner. You wanted a beautiful accessory that matched your beautiful house. You wanted a mausoleum for your family's ego, and I am done being a part of the decoration. The words hit him like a physical blow. He actually stumbled back a step, speechless, and in that moment of shocked silence, Ethan stepped between us, a solid, immovable presence. It's time for you to go, Liam, Ethan said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Now. Let her finish. For a second I thought Liam might start yelling, but seeing his brother, his own blood standing so firmly on my side, seemed to finally break him. Defeated, his shoulders slumped. He gave me one last pleading look, and then turned and stormed out of the house, his footsteps echoing his fury down the stairs. As I carried the last box out to my car, I paused on the front steps. The cool afternoon air felt clean fresh. The house behind me held no more ghosts. It was just a building, a beautiful empty shell. I hadn't just packed my things. I had packed up an entire version of myself, the smaller, quieter, accommodating Ava, and I was leaving her behind for good. As we drove away, Ethan glanced over at me. He's not wrong about one thing, you know, he said quietly. My mother, she will not let this go. This was the easy part. Be careful, Ava. His warning hung in the air, a cold promise of the next battle, in a war I was just beginning to understand. The initial shockwave of the breakup had passed, leaving behind the tense, quiet air that precedes a storm. The direct confrontations were over, and the real war, a far more insidious and dangerous one, had just begun. This was Genevieve's war, fought not with raised voices, but with hushed whispers in the city's most exclusive circles. I felt the first tremor on a Tuesday morning. I was in my new temporary office, a sterile, white-walled space in a shared building that felt like a painful downgrade from my sunlit studio in the brownstone. I called my primary fabric supplier, a cheerful, reliable man named Mr. Peterson, to confirm a large order for a new client. Ah, Ava, he said, his voice unusually hesitant. About that particular silk velvet, we're running into some unexpected inventory issues from the distributor in Italy. Inventory issues? I asked, frowning. But you confirmed the stock last week. Yes, well, things change, he stammered. It might be delayed. Indefinitely. I'm terribly sorry. It was a lie, and we both knew it. He had never been anything but flawlessly efficient for 5 years. The second tremor hit 2 days later. It arrived in the form of a curt email from a Mrs. Davenport, a wealthy heiress for whom I was supposed to be designing a multi-million-dollar residential project. Just last week she had been gushing over my preliminary sketches, calling my vision a breath of fresh air. The email was cold corporate. Dear Miss Monroe, after careful consideration, we have decided to go in a different direction with the design for our home. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. Going in a different direction. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a coordinated attack. It was Genevieve working the phones, dripping her sweet, slow-acting poison into the well of my professional life. I could picture the scene perfectly. Genevieve seated at a table at a charity luncheon at the Chilton Club, surrounded by Boston's most influential women. She wouldn't be shrill or angry. She would be the picture of concerned, heartbroken elegance. I could almost hear her voice pitched just right for her audience to lean in. "Poor dear Ava," she would say, dabbing the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin. "She's so wonderfully creative, but I'm afraid she's always been a bit emotionally fragile." A dramatic, sorrowful pause. The pressures of the Hayes family, the demands of that life, it was all just too much for her. She's had a bit of a breakdown, you see. She would look around the table, her eyes wide with feigned worry. "We're all terribly concerned. It's why we're hoping for a quiet private settlement. For her own sake, of course." The narrative was brilliant in its cruelty. It wasn't a direct slander you could sue over. It was a character assassination disguised as compassion. She was painting me as unstable, unreliable, and unprofessional absolute poison for an interior designer whose business is built on trust and reputation. The stress began to gnaw at me. I was working 14-hour days, trying to salvage my projects while fighting a ghost. The walls of my temporary office felt like they were closing in. "This is what they do, Ava," Maya said, her voice a furious hiss over the phone one evening as I recounted the latest cancellation. "This is how they fight. They don't use fists. They use guest lists and black tie invitations. They socially assassinate you. Don't you dare let her get to you. Don't let her win." I was trying, but I felt like I was punching at smoke. The turning point came on a rainy Friday afternoon. I was staring blankly at my computer screen when a new email notification popped up. The sender was an unidentifiable string of letters and numbers. The subject line was just 2 words, "For your information." My heart pounded as I clicked it open. The body of the email was stark. It was just a short list of names, and next to each name was a date from the past 2 weeks. Caroline Finch, Boston Design Weekly, Marcus Thorn Development Group, Julianne Croft. Head buyer, Moderno Furniture Collective. I stared at the list, my mind racing. Caroline Finch was one of the city's most prominent design bloggers. Marcus Thorn was a powerful real estate developer I'd been trying to get a meeting with for months. Julianne Croft was the head buyer for my biggest furniture account. What did it mean? The answer came 3 days later. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello? Ava, it's Chloe Vance." Her voice was trembling, small and uncertain. I felt a flash of hot anger. "What do you want, Chloe?" I asked, my voice cold. I had to call," she stammered. "I know you have absolutely no reason to trust me or to even speak to me, but what Genevieve is doing, it's wrong. She's systematically trying to ruin you." "Why are you telling me this?" I snapped, all my pain and anger bubbling to the surface. "Guilt?" "Yes," she admitted, her voice cracking. It was a raw, honest sound. "Yes, it's guilt, and it's fear." She took a shaky breath. "I saw the way she looked at you that night at Aria, the way she discarded you without a second thought. And in that moment, I realized, to her I'm just as disposable as you were. I was just a pawn in her game." She paused. "I resigned from Hayes Corp last week. I'm moving to Chicago. I don't want to be a part of that family, that world." My own anger subsided slightly, replaced by a weary understanding. "The email," I said quietly. "Was that you?" "Yes," she confirmed. "Those are the people I know for a fact she has met with in the last 2 weeks. She calls them precautionary conversations. She's spreading her story about your breakdown. She's trying to cut you off at the knees before you can even stand up on your own." Hearing it confirmed, laid out so plainly, changed something inside me. The anxiety that had been a constant hum under my skin for weeks evaporated. In its place, a cold, clear anger began to burn. This wasn't just about a divorce anymore. This wasn't about Liam. Genevieve hadn't just declared war on my marriage. She had declared war on my livelihood, on my name, on my very identity. After I hung up with Chloe, I immediately dialed Maya. I relayed the entire conversation, my voice devoid of its earlier tremor, replaced now by something hard and sharp. "She wants to play in the mud," I said, staring out my office window at the Boston skyline. "Fine." A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. "But she's forgetting something very, very important. I own the most exclusive playground in the entire city, and it's time to send out some invitations." My temporary office, once a symbol of my displacement, had transformed into a war room. Blueprints for client projects were pinned to one wall, but the large central table was littered with seating charts, guest lists, and champagne swatches. I was on the phone, my voice calm and firm, while Maya sat opposite me, a red pen in her hand, slashing through names on a list like a general purging disloyal officers. "She uses social events as a weapon," I had told Maya over coffee that morning, the idea taking shape brilliant and terrifying in its audacity. "She builds her power in ballrooms and at charity auctions. She thinks that's her turf." I had looked at Maya, a slow smile spreading across my face. "So will I." The plan was audacious, bordering on insane, to be executed in less than 2 weeks, an exclusive last-minute charity gala held at Aria. I chose the beneficiary with surgical precision, the Boston Arts Initiative for Youth, a prestigious, unimpeachable program that provided arts education to underprivileged children. It was a cause so noble, so deeply embedded in the city's philanthropic fabric that even Genevieve Hayes wouldn't dare publicly oppose it. The event would be a dazzling showcase of Aria at its finest, a testament to my stability and competence, and a powerful refutation of her lies. When I ran the idea by Julian Croft, he was silent for a moment before letting out a low chuckle. "Miss Monroe," he had said, "that is strategically brilliant." The execution was a controlled whirlwind. I called in every favor I had ever earned. I called Jean-Pierre a celebrated French chef I'd once collaborated with on a pop-up. "Jean-Pierre, my love," I'd said, "I need a miracle and your truffle soup recipe." He had laughed and agreed immediately. I secured a renowned jazz quartet, a sommelier who owed me for a design consultation, and a floral designer who was eager for the exposure. The guest list was our primary weapon, and Maya and I curated it with the ruthlessness of political strategists. "Caroline Finch, the blogger," Maya said, tapping her pen. "Table 1, front and center. Let her see everything." "Agreed," I replied. "Marcus Thorne, the developer who ghosted me, goes at table 3, right next to the editor of Boston Spaces." Every name on Chloe's list was strategically placed. Boston's most influential media personalities, critics, and philanthropists filled the A-list. Then I made the most important calls myself. I personally invited Ethan, who accepted with genuine enthusiasm. And finally, a thick cream-colored invitation, engraved in copper foil, was messengered to the Hayes mansion. It was a checkmate delivered on cardstock. To decline would be a public admission of the feud, proving their pettiness. To attend would be to walk directly into my arena completely on my terms. The night of the gala was pure electricity. I had transformed Aria. Thousands of tiny fairy lights were woven into hanging installations of baby's breath, making the ceiling look like a star-filled sky. The tables were draped in deep sapphire velvet, with centerpieces of white orchids and flickering candles. The air hummed with power money and influence. I stood near the entrance, a queen receiving her court. I wore a gown of deep emerald green silk that left my shoulders bare. It was a statement, the color of life, of money, of strength. It was everything that Genevieve's world of beige was not. As I moved through the room greeting guests, my name on their lips, I felt a power I had never known. I was not the fragile, broken thing of Genevieve's whispers. I was a formidable force. My first target was Caroline Finch. I found her near the bar. "Caroline," I said smoothly, my smile warm. "It's so wonderful to see you." She looked momentarily flustered. "Ava, you look incredible. This event, it's breathtaking." "I was so disappointed we had to postpone our interview," I said, my voice laced with just the right amount of regret. "Things have been hectic, but I'm working on a new design concept I think you'll find fascinating. We must get something on the books for next week." Seeing me there so clearly in my element, poised and celebrated the seed of doubt about Genevieve's narrative, was visibly planted in her eyes. "Of course," she said eagerly. "Absolutely. I'll call your office tomorrow." Then they arrived. Genevieve and Robert Hayes. The room seemed to hold its breath for a second. Genevieve wore a pale gold dress, her smile a tight, brittle thing. Robert looked stoic, his eyes sweeping the room as if calculating the cost of every orchid. I met them at the door. "Genevieve, Robert," I said, my own smile both polite and undeniably victorious. "I'm so glad you could make it. Your family's support for the arts is as always so deeply appreciated." The rest of the night was a slow, exquisite torture for them. They were trapped in a showcase of my success, forced to watch as I was toasted, praised, and admired. They were a king and queen held captive in an enemy's triumphant court. The climax of the evening came just before the main course. I stepped onto the small stage at the front of the room. A single spotlight hit me. "Good evening." I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight to support such a vital cause." I spoke for a few minutes about the arts initiative, my passion for it genuine. Then I shifted. "I've been thinking a lot lately about creation," I said, my eyes scanning the crowd. "About what it takes to build something meaningful. My grandfather was a mechanic. He spent his life with grease under his fingernails, bringing old engines back to life. He wasn't a fancy man, but he was a creator. And he used to tell me, 'Ava, building something with your own two hands, it gives you a strength no one can ever take away from you.'" I let the words settle, my gaze drifting over my captive audience until it found her. My eyes met Genevieve's across the glittering room. "This restaurant, this night, is a testament to that belief," I said, my voice soft but resonant. "It's about building a legacy based not on a name you inherit, but on the world you create." The applause was thunderous, a wave of sound that washed over me, a validation so public and so powerful it felt like a physical force. As I stepped down from the stage, Ethan was there, a glass of champagne in his hand and a wide grin on his face. "That wasn't a speech, Ava," he said, handing me the glass. "That was a checkmate." The gala raised a record amount for the charity. The next day, the society pages were not whispering about my breakdown. They were shouting about my triumph. The photos were of me laughing with the mayor, shaking hands with philanthropists, looking radiant and powerful. Genevieve's campaign had been publicly and spectacularly neutralized. The chapter ends the following afternoon. I was back in my sterile temporary office, the quiet a stark contrast to the night before. I was scrolling through emails when a new one popped up. The sender was Marcus Thorne, the developer who had ghosted me. "Dear Miss Monroe," the email read, "I was at your gala last night. Truly spectacular. I believe we may have been too hasty in our previous decision. I'd be very interested in hearing more about your vision for the waterfront project at your earliest convenience." I leaned back in my chair, and a slow, deep, genuine smile spread across my face. The Queen had taken back the board. The success of the gala was a seismic event shifting the very ground beneath the Hayes family. The power dynamic had been irrevocably altered. Their carefully constructed world of influence, built on whispers and backroom deals, had been stormed by an enemy who refused to play by their rules. They were for the first time in a long time on the defensive. The chapter opens in the aftermath inside the suffocating opulence of the Hayes Mansion library. The air, usually still and smelling of old leather and accomplishment, was thick with fury. Robert Hayes, his face a thundercloud, threw a copy of the Boston Globe's society section onto the polished surface of his desk. My face, smiling and confident, stared up from the page. "Your little social games have made her a martyr, Genevieve." He roared, his usual cold pragmatism abandoned for raw anger. "She's on the cover of the society pages, lauded as a philanthropist and a visionary. You haven't silenced her. You've made her more powerful." Genevieve for once looked shaken, her composure as fragile as a teacup. "I was only trying to protect this family's reputation." "You've shattered it," Ethan's voice cut in. He was leaning against a bookshelf, his arms crossed, watching the scene with a disgusted weariness. He sided openly with his father. "Ava outplayed you, Mom. She used your own tactics against you. And she did it with more class." Liam, caught in the crossfire, looked pale and haunted. He was being battered by his parents' fury, by Ethan's judgment, and by the undeniable public truth of his own failure. He had to finally face the fact that Ava wasn't coming back. The control he had taken for granted his entire life had vanished. He finally spoke, his voice strained. "We need to end this," he said, looking at his father. Let's make her an offer, a generous one. Settle this quickly and quietly before it gets any worse." It wasn't a plea for fairness, it was a desperate strategy to stop the bleeding. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Julian Croft. "They've blinked," he said, a note of satisfaction in his calm voice. "They want to mediate. Liam and his attorney will meet with us tomorrow at 10. They were very specific. No parents." The mediation session took place in a neutral territory that felt anything but a sterile, soulless conference room in a downtown law firm. The only color in the room came from the view of the gray city skyline. Liam was already there when we arrived. He looked tired, strained, the confident charm replaced by a weary desperation. He attempted a personal appeal before the lawyers could formally begin. "Ava," he said, his voice low as he stood to greet me, I'm sorry. For everything." He ran a hand through his hair. "I was weak, and I let my mother's ambition for me cloud my judgment. I truly want you to be happy. I just want this to be over." I looked at him, at the man I had once shared a bed and a life with. The apology sounded rehearsed, a strategy memo converted to dialogue. "I want that too, Liam," I replied, my voice impassive. "Let's hear the offer." We sat. Liam's lawyer, a slick man in a suit that cost more than my first car, slid a thick leather-bound folder across the table. "As you'll see," he said with a smug smile, "Mr. Hayes is prepared to be exceptionally generous to ensure a swift and amicable resolution." On the surface, the offer looked impressive. They were offering me the full equity of the Beacon Hill brownstone, a significant 6-figure lump sum alimony payment, and most notably, they would make no future claim on Arya. But Julian, his eyes scanning the pages with practiced speed, saw the venom hidden beneath the honey. I watched his expression remain neutral, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. After a few minutes, he pushed the folder gently toward me, his finger resting on a specific subclause. The poison was in the details. The generous alimony was structured as a one-time buyout contingent on me waiving any claim to his future earnings, which as a future CEO of Hayes Corp. Were astronomical. Then there was the non-disclosure agreement. It wasn't just a standard privacy clause. It was an ironclad muzzle, legally preventing me from ever speaking, writing, or even hinting at my life with the Hayes family for any reason for the rest of my life. But the final, most breathtaking insult was in a small, almost hidden clause under the heading spousal contribution. It stated that for my 5 years of marriage, for the hundreds of client dinners I had hosted, for managing a social calendar that was critical to his career, for the emotional support I provided for subsuming my own career for his, they had assigned a monetary value. $10,000. Julian leaned back, his voice calm and laced with dry ice. "This isn't an offer, Mr. Hayes," he said, not even looking at Liam's lawyer. "This is an insult." He looked at me. "They are offering to pay you to disappear quietly. They value your restaurant at $0 because they know they can't touch it, and they're undervaluing everything else, especially your silence." My gaze lifted from the insulting document and locked onto Liam's. The room, the lawyers, the city outside it all faded away. There was only him. "Is this what you think I'm worth, Liam?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. $10,000? Is that the value you place on the 5 years I spent putting your career, your family, your needs ahead of my own? I leaned forward. "Is that what you think I was worth when I stayed up all night helping you redraft the presentation for the Seaport development? The first project you almost bankrupted before I saved you?" He flinched, the specific memory clearly hitting its mark. He couldn't meet my eyes. It's, he stammered, looking at his lawyer for help. It's what my father's financial advisors determined was a fair and equitable figure. Your father's advisors? I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping me. Of course. How foolish of me to think you were involved in the valuation of our marriage. I pushed my chair back and stood up, the legs scraping softly against the floor. This was never about what's fair. It's about what's expedient for Hayes Corp. I looked at my lawyer. Julian, I believe we're done here. I turned and walked out of the room without a backward glance, leaving a stunned silence in my wake. In the hallway, Julian caught up to me, a rare nod of approval on his face. Good, he said simply. You didn't fall for the bait. They underestimated you. He pressed the elevator button. Now they know we won't roll over. It's time to stop reacting and start applying our own pressure. Back in my office that night, the adrenaline faded, leaving a cold, hard resolve in its place. The paltry offer wasn't just a business negotiation. It was the final definitive proof that to them, I was never a partner. I was an asset to be managed, and now a liability to be written off. I said to Maya over the phone, they think this is about money, about getting a fair settlement. They still don't get it. I pulled up the last 5 years of our joint financial statements on my computer, the neat columns of numbers, a stark black and white history of our life together. If they want to play hardball about finances, I murmured, a dangerous glint in my eye as I started highlighting line after line. Let's take a closer look at all the numbers, every single one. The insult of their $10,000 valuation of my life had done something I don't think the Hayes family ever anticipated. It had replaced my emotional pain with a cold forensic fury. My design studio, once a vibrant chaos of fabric swatches and color palettes, transformed into a financial war room. Stacks of bank statements replaced bolts of silk. The scent of coffee and ozone from the printer replaced the smell of jasmine and old books. This was a new kind of design project, finding the hidden architecture in a mountain of numbers. Fueled by a mix of righteous anger and the meticulous professionalism I applied to everything I did, I dedicated myself to a full forensic examination of the last 5 years of our shared life. For days I barely slept. I lived on takeout coffee and the grim satisfaction of a highlighter slicing through a credit card statement. Maya would come over after her long days at the law firm, her sharp legal mind spotting irregularities I might have missed. We'd have Julian Croft on speakerphone, his calm voice providing the strategic framework for our search. Don't just look for big expenses, he'd advised. Look for patterns. Look for anything that doesn't have a clear and obvious purpose. Initially, my goal was defensive. I was simply trying to prove my worth in the face of their insult, documenting every dinner party I'd hosted for his clients, every trip I'd planned that benefited his career, every expense I had covered out of my own accounts before we merged them. But as I dug deeper back through years of statements from our joint investment portfolio, something else began to emerge. It started as a flicker of curiosity. A single large payment, $50,000, made 2 years ago to an entity called Berkshire Holdings, LLC. The memo line was vague consulting fee. I might have dismissed it, but a month later there was another one. $75,000 to Pioneer Valley Ventures, LLC. Memo project materials, then another, and another, a steady rhythmic bleed of large round numbers from our joint investments to a series of LLCs I had never heard of. My designer's brain trained to see patterns kicked in. I opened a spreadsheet and began to log each payment, each date, each cryptic memo. A timeline began to form, and it was alarming. Over the course of 18 months, nearly $500,000 had vanished from our shared future and into these ghost companies. I cross-referenced the dates of the payments with Liam's old calendars. My blood ran cold. The withdrawals coincided perfectly with a project he was managing, his first major solo command for Hayes Corp. It was a passion project, as Genevieve had often boasted at dinner parties. The development of a lavish, ultra-luxury boutique hotel in the Berkshires, a property called the Blackwood Manor, Publicly, it was touted as the glittering future of the Hayes brand. A prickle of profound unease went down my spine. I picked up the phone and called the one person who might tell me the truth. "Ethan," I said when he answered, "I have a weird question for you about the Blackwood Manor project. I'm going through some old financials and... Did you ever consult on it architecturally?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "No," he finally said, his voice tight with an old frustration. And that was a sore spot, actually. Liam insisted on using some avant-garde firm from New York, said they were the only ones who understood his vision. He sighed. I offered to look at the plans as a favor just to give a second opinion, but he completely shut me out. Said it was his baby, and that he had it under control. "Why are you asking?" "I'm not sure yet," I said, my suspicion hardening into a sickening certainty. "The numbers just seem off." The real breakthrough came from Maya. I sent her the list of LLCs. She took it to her office the next day. "I'll use the firm's resources," she'd said. "Let's see who these ghosts are." Her call came that afternoon. "Ava," she said, her voice grim and devoid of its usual wit, "are you sitting down?" She told me that the LLCs weren't architectural firms. They weren't materials suppliers. They were shell corporations registered in Delaware with no public records of any actual business, and the registered agent for every single one of them was Liam's personal wealth manager. "He's hiding something," Maya said, her voice low. "He's been moving money out of your joint accounts and funneling it into the hotel project through a back door." The question was no longer if but why. With Julian's guidance, we took the next step. We hired a discreet forensic accountant, a gruff, no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Helen, who specialized in high-net-worth divorces and looked like she could smell a lie from a mile away. Helen took my mountain of paperwork and disappeared for a week. When she called us in for a meeting, she didn't waste time with pleasantries. She laid out a series of charts and reports on Julian's conference table. The picture she painted was not one of mismanagement. It was a catastrophe. The Blackwood Manor, Helen began tapping a chart showing a terrifying nosedive, is a complete and total financial disaster. She explained it all in cold, hard numbers. Liam's visionary plans were wildly amateurishly over budget. The New York firm was charging fees that were double the industry standard. Construction was plagued by costly errors, failed inspections, and massive delays. The project was hemorrhaging money. And Liam had been hiding it. Terrified of admitting his first solo project was a failure, terrified of facing his father, he had started plugging the holes. He had been secretly siphoning money from his and my joint investment portfolio, and as Helen's projections suggested, likely from other Hayes Corp accounts, as well funneling it through those shell corporations to pay off contractors and hide the catastrophic losses from the board. He was, in effect, embezzling money to cover up his own staggering incompetence. I felt a dizzying wave of vertigo, as if the entire room had tilted on its axis. The affair, Chloe, the public humiliation, Genevieve's schemes, all of it. It was a sideshow, a diversion. This was the secret he was really protecting. His real profound betrayal wasn't just to me. It was to his own family, to the company that was his entire identity. He wasn't the golden boy. He was just a desperate man drowning in his own lies, and he was willing to pull me under with him. Julian Croft looked at the damning report Helen had prepared, then looked at me, his expression unreadable. "This," he said, his voice a low, powerful rumble, "is not a queen on the chessboard, Miss Monroe." He paused, letting the full weight of the discovery settle over me. "This is the entire game." I stared at the evidence, at the neat, undeniable stack of papers on the desk that held the key to my freedom, and the blueprint of Liam's utter destruction. And I finally understood the depth of his desperation, the real reason he couldn't afford a messy divorce. It was never about love or embarrassment. It was about survival. The air in Julian Croft's office was thick with the scent of power, not just his, but mine. The damning report from Helen, the forensic accountant, lay in the center of the vast mahogany desk like an unexploded bomb. It was leverage. It was dynamite. The question was, how to use it. The initial discussion was a tense three-way debate on the very nature of justice. Maya, ever the pragmatist, saw the path with brutal clarity. "You expose this Ava," she said, her voice sharp, leaning forward in her chair. "You go to Robert Hayes directly. You lay it all out. The public fallout for them would be catastrophic. A scandal of this magnitude would taint the Hayes Corp brand for a generation. They will give you anything you want to make it go away. Burn them to the ground." Julian, more cautious, saw the potential for unintended consequences. A full public exposure could trigger an SEC investigation lawsuits from shareholders. It could become a runaway inferno that we can't control. He countered, his tone measured and strategic. "We must use the threat of exposure as our leverage for a private settlement. It gives us a maximum control with minimum collateral damage to unintended parties." They both looked at me. Their arguments were logical, powerful, but my own feelings were more complicated. The initial white-hot fury had cooled, leaving behind a deep, profound disappointment. Looking at the numbers, at the desperate, clumsy attempts to hide his failure, I no longer saw Liam as a monster. I saw him as a weak, frightened man, suffocating under the weight of his family's impossible expectations, the very same expectations that had tried to crush me. "He built a prison of lies for himself," I said quietly, surprising them both, "and he was trying to lock me in it with him." My path forward became clear. This wasn't about revenge, not anymore. It wasn't about destroying Liam or his family. It was about a clean, final break. It was about forcing them to see the truth, not through the lens of a newspaper headline, but directly from me. "I won't go to the press," I decided, my voice firm, "and I won't go to the authorities." I looked at Julian. I want to confront them, all of them, in person. I wanted to see their faces when they finally understood that the golden boy they worshipped was a fraud, and the woman they dismissed as a decorative afterthought was the one holding the detonator. Julian drafted a letter. It was a masterpiece of a cold corporate formality, requesting a final in-person meeting to discuss final settlement terms. He made the list of required attendees non-negotiable: Ava Monroe and her counsel, and Liam Hayes, his counsel, and crucially, Genevieve and Robert Hayes. They agreed almost immediately, their arrogance palpable even through their lawyer's response. They clearly assumed I was crawling back to the table, ready to accept their paltry offer. I chose the location myself, the same sterile, soulless conference room as before. I wanted them back in the exact spot where they had last insulted me to feel the tectonic shift in power. When I walked into that room, I felt a transformation. I was not a victim seeking solace. I was a CEO entering a boardroom to conduct a hostile takeover. I wore a tailored charcoal gray suit, my hair pulled back in a severe, elegant knot. I was poised, calm and untouchable. They were all there, a portrait of dysfunctional power. Liam looked pale and nervous. Genevieve had her mask of cool superiority firmly in place, though it seemed brittle. Robert looked impatient, as if this were a tedious distraction from more important business. Liam's lawyer began with an air of condescending magnanimity. "We're pleased you've decided to reconsider our generous offer, Miss Monroe," he said with a slick smile. "I'm sure we can come to a swift—" Julian Croft cut him off, not with a word, but with a thin, predatory smile of his own. "We are not here to discuss your offer," he said calmly. "We are here to present ours." With a slow, deliberate movement, Julian placed a single slim folder in the dead center of the table. Inside was not a legal document, but a single double-sided page, Helen's executive summary, a clear, concise, and utterly damning outline of the embezzlement, the shell corporations, and the catastrophic financial state of the Blackwood Manor. Robert Hayes, the patriarch, picked it up first, an annoyed frown on his face. As he read, the frown dissolved. The color drained from his cheeks. His legendary composure evaporated, replaced by a look of stark, horrified disbelief. Without a word, his hand trembling slightly, he passed the paper to Genevieve. She read it, her eyes widening. Her mask of cool superiority didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. She looked at Liam, her mouth opening and closing silently, her expression a toxic cocktail of disbelief and maternal fury. Liam refused to look at the paper. He knew what it was. He just stared at me across the table, his face a portrait of utter, absolute ruin. "As you can see," Julian said into the thick, stunned silence, "my client has discovered certain financial irregularities." He let the word hang in the air. Irregularities that the Hayes Core Board, not to mention your shareholders, would find most illuminating. Then I spoke for the first time. My voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of the last 5 years. For 5 years, I began looking at Genevieve and Robert. You treated me as a decorative accessory. You judged my background, dismissed my ambition, and tried to sand down every interesting part of me until I fit into your perfect beige world. My gaze shifted. When that didn't work, you tried to replace me. When I fought back, you tried to ruin my reputation, all to protect an image, a legacy. Finally, I looked at Liam. And you, Liam, you let them, every step of the way, because you were so terrified of them finding out that you weren't the genius they thought you were. You were willing to sacrifice me, our marriage, and my life's work, just to cover up your own failure. I slid a second folder across the table. This one was thicker. "This is my offer," I said, my voice leaving no room for discussion. "It is not a negotiation." The terms were clean and brutal. 1A, revised financial settlement awarding me 60% of all marital assets, a figure that directly reflected the funds Liam had embezzled from our joint accounts. 2, full unencumbered title to the Beacon Hill brownstone free and clear. 3, a legally binding permanent gag order preventing any member of the Hayes family from ever speaking about me, my business, or my personal life, publicly or privately. 4, a sizable mandatory donation from Hayes Corp. To the Boston Arts Initiative for Youth, to be made publicly in my name. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze locking with Robert's. "You will sign this by the end of the business day." I concluded, my voice as hard and polished as the table between us. "If you don't, this folder," I tapped the financial report with a single manicured finger, "goes to the Boston Globe and the SEC by 9 a.m. tomorrow." I held his stare. "The choice is yours, Robert. Protect your son and your company, or face the consequences." The ultimatum was delivered. I had taken back my life, and I had done it completely on my own terms. The moment the conference room door clicked shut behind Julian and me, the vacuum of our departure was filled with a furious, chaotic implosion. The carefully maintained facade of the Hayes family shattered, and the raw, ugly truth of their dysfunction was laid bare. Genevieve was the first to find her voice, and it was venomous. But for the first time in my memory, its poison wasn't directed at me. It was aimed squarely at her son. "You foolish, foolish boy!" She shrieked, her voice a shrill, ugly thing I'd never heard before. She rounded on Liam, her perfectly manicured hands clenched into fists. How could you be so stupid, so weak? You risked everything, this family, this company, our name, for what? For your pathetic little pride." Robert remained silent, his face ashen. The patriarch, the titan of industry who commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will, looked old, defeated. He was staring at the damning one-page report still lying on the table, but he wasn't just seeing financial ruin. He was seeing the complete and utter betrayal of his chosen son, his heir apparent. He was seeing a legacy built on sand. The fight devolved into a storm of accusations between mother and son. Attacked and cornered Liam finally broke. The bravado, the charm, the lies, it all crumbled away, leaving behind a terrified, broken man. In a torrent of desperate words, he confessed everything. The spiraling costs of the Blackwood Manor, the fear of telling his father he had failed, the desperate illegal measures he had taken to cover it all up. It was into this maelstrom that Ethan was summoned. I had insisted to Julian that he be present in the building just in case. When he walked into the conference room, the shouting stopped. He took in the scene, his mother's furious face, his brother's tear-streaked one, his father's hollow gaze. He calmly picked up the report from the table and read it. His expression wasn't one of triumph or surprise. It was one of profound, weary sadness. He looked at his parents. "Screaming at him won't change anything now," he said, his voice the only note of reason in the room. "She has us completely. There is no move here but to sign." He took a breath and looked at his mother, then his father. "You built this system. This pressure cooker of impossible expectations. You wanted a golden boy, not a son." His gaze fell on his brother. Liam just couldn't handle the heat. His words for once seemed to land with the weight of undeniable truth silencing the room. Meanwhile, Maya and I were in a quiet, elegant bar near Julian's office. The room was dark-paneled in walnut, smelling of old leather and gin. I was nursing a single glass of champagne, watching the tiny bubbles rise to the surface. My hands were perfectly steady. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't gleeful. I just felt quiet. A strange, calm emptiness had settled over me. The fight was over. "Are you okay?" Maya asked gently, her voice a soft intrusion into my thoughts. I considered the question for a moment. "I think so," I replied thoughtfully. "It's strange. I thought I would feel victorious, elated, but I just feel—" I searched for the word. Quiet. All that noise, all their drama and expectations. It's not inside my head anymore. It's back in that room where it belongs. The call from Julian came less than 2 hours later. His voice was brisk, professional. "They've signed," he said simply. "Every term. The papers are being messengered to my office now for your final signature." That evening, I didn't want a celebratory dinner. I didn't want noise or congratulations. I asked Maya to drive me to Aria. The restaurant was dark closed for the night. I let myself in, the familiar click of the lock echoing in the silence. I walked through the empty dining room, my footsteps soft on the wide plank floors. This space, my secret sanctuary, the stage for my liberation, it was finally wholly mine. I went into my small office in the back, expecting to sit alone with my thoughts, but he was waiting for me, Liam. He was standing by the window, looking out at the darkened alley. He was there alone. Julian had called to let me know he'd asked through his lawyer for 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, but feeling a deep need for a final quiet end, I had agreed. He looked diminished. Stripped of the Tom Ford suit and the easy charm, he seemed smaller, like a man who had been hollowed out. "I signed it," he said, his voice flat. "All of it." "I know," I replied, my own voice gentle. There was no anger left, just a vast, quiet space where my love for him used to be. "I never wanted to hurt you," he began, the words sounding hollow and automatic even to him. I gave a small, sad shake of my head. "You didn't just hurt me, Liam," I said, my voice firm but without malice. "You tried to erase me. You and your mother. You tried to make me disappear into a version of myself that you found more acceptable." I paused, the final tragic truth settling between us. "And the most tragic part is, you were so busy trying to live up to their definition of success, you erased yourself first." He had no response to that. He simply nodded, accepting it. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small navy blue velvet box. He opened it. Inside, my engagement ring glittered under the dim office light, a classic emerald-cut diamond. A beautiful, cold, perfect ring chosen by Genevieve. "I think you should have this," he said, holding it out to me. "Sell it. Fund your next project. It's the least I can do." I looked at the ring, the symbol of a life I had once desperately wanted, a life that had turned out to be an illusion. With a steady hand, I reached out and gently closed the lid of the box. I pushed it back toward him. "No, Liam," I said softly. "That belongs to the past. It belongs to Hayes Corpy." I looked him in the eye. My future is self-funded. It was the final act of severance. I was taking nothing from them, nothing from that life that I had not built or earned myself. He looked at the box in his hand, then back at me, and for the first time, I think he truly understood. He nodded slowly. "Good luck, Ava," he said, and there was a note of genuine, weary sincerity in his voice. You too, Liam, I replied. He turned and walked out of my office, out of my restaurant, out of my life. I stood alone in the silence, the familiar scent of lemon oil and old wood a comforting presence. The silence was no longer empty. It was vast and deep and filled with possibility. On my desk, unrolled and waiting, were the blueprints for a new waterfront design project. And for the first time as I looked at them, I saw a future that was entirely beautifully and unapologetically my own. 6 months later, the Boston autumn was a riot of gold and crimson, and the air was crisp with the promise of new beginnings. My new beginning was staring back at me from the front of a newsstand. There on the cover of Boston Magazine was a stunning portrait of me. I was standing in the soft glowing light of Aria, one hand resting on the back of a custom-designed velvet chair, a small, confident smile on my lips. The headline in bold, elegant serif font read, "Ava Monroe, the architect of her own fortune." I bought a copy and read the feature story while sipping a latte at a small cafe. The article detailed the meteoric success of Aria, praising its unique design and culinary excellence. It announced the official launch of my newly expanded independent firm, Monroe Design Group. The writer framed my story as one of talent, resilience, and quiet power. There was not a single mention of the Hayes family. It was the most eloquent, most satisfying victory of all. They hadn't just been defeated, they had been rendered completely irrelevant to my narrative. My life was my own now in every sense of the word. I was no longer a guest at Maya's fortress of logic. I was home. My new home was a spectacular penthouse loft in the Seaport district, a space of soaring ceilings, exposed brick, and floor-to-ceiling windows that drank in the city skyline. I had sold the Beacon Hill brownstone in less than a week for a significant profit, wiping away the last physical traces of that constrained life. This new space was me, a bold, unapologetic mix of industrial chic and warm organic textures. It was filled with art from local creators I admired and custom furniture I had designed and built myself. It was a space that breathed, a scene from the previous Sunday replayed in my mind. The sun was streaming into my new kitchen, illuminating the steam rising from 3 coffee mugs. Maya was perched on a counter stool, laughing, while Ethan was showing us photos of his new puppy on his phone. The dynamic between Ethan and me had evolved into a genuine, respectful friendship, a bond forged in the wreckage of his family. He had since left Hayes Corp, taking a few key clients with him to start his own boutique architectural firm. My father is semi-retired now, Ethan had told us, swirling his coffee. He's spending most of his time on his boat. He put me in charge of restructuring the Blackwood Manor project. He gave a wry smile. I'm basically gutting Liam's entire disaster and starting over from the studs up. And Liam, Maya had asked, her curiosity clinical. Moved to San Diego last month, Ethan replied with a sigh. Took a lower-level project manager position at a different company. Trying to start fresh, I guess, away from the family shadow. He shook his head. And my mother, she's withdrawn. She resigned from 2 of her charity boards. Her entire social world was built on the foundation of the flawless Hayes legacy. When that cracked, so did she. The Hayes empire wasn't destroyed, but it was diminished, humbled, a quiet justice. The true climax of my new life, however, wasn't personal, it was professional. It happened 2 days ago in a boardroom on the 50th floor of the city's newest skyscraper. I was there to pitch for the biggest contract of my career, designing the interiors for the flagship hotel of the Sterling Hospitality Group, a new cutting-edge company poised to become the most significant rival to Hayes Corp in the city. I stood before their board of directors, not as the nervous, accommodating woman I once was, but as the founder of Monroe Design Group. I was confident, articulate, and brilliant. I didn't just present designs, I presented a philosophy about creating spaces that were authentic, that told a story that connected with people on a human level. When I finished, the CEO, a sharp, discerning woman named Eleanor Vance, looked at me, her expression impressed. "Miss Monroe, your work is exceptional," she said. "Your vision is precisely what we're looking for." She paused, her eyes searching mine. "But we have to ask, given your history, Do you foresee any conflicts working on a project that will be in direct competition with Hayes Corp? The question hung in the air, the last ghost of my past. I met her gaze without flinching. A calm, self-assured smile touched my lips, a smile light years away from the nervous woman I used to be. "The only history I'm focused on, Miss Vance," I said, my voice even and clear, "is the one I'm about to build with you," which brought me to now. The final scene of this story isn't in a restaurant or a boardroom. It's on the 40th floor of a half-finished building, an unfinished concrete balcony high above the city. The wind, fresh off the harbor, whipped through my hair, tasting of salt and freedom. I had won the contract. In my hands I held a massive roll of blueprints. With a satisfying crackle, I unrolled them against the temporary railing, the pages flapping in the breeze. I scanned the detailed plans for the hotel lobby, my mind already seeing the finished space, feeling its textures, its light. My finger traced the title block in the bottom corner of the page. It didn't say Hayes. It said Project Sterling Grand Hotel Boston Design Firm, Monroe Design Group lead designer Ava Monroe. I looked up from the blueprints out at the sprawling Boston skyline. The city that was once the backdrop to my confinement was now just a canvas. My canvas! I was not just a survivor of my story. I was the creator of the next one, the architect of my own life. The story ends here, not on a note of loud revenge, but on the quiet, powerful, and deeply satisfying image of a woman who has found her true worth and is now finally building a world to match it. Looking back on it all now, it's easy to see the whole journey as one big explosive moment, that disastrous anniversary dinner where my world shattered like the crystal glass in my hand. But the truth is, the destruction didn't start that night. It began years earlier in a series of tiny, almost unnoticeable surrenders. It started every time I chose a more appropriate beige over a color I loved because I knew it would please Genevieve. It happened every time I let Liam dismiss my life's passion as a nice hobby and didn't correct him. It was in every silent nod, every swallowed opinion, every small compromise I made to make myself smaller, quieter, and less threatening to the fragile egos around me. We often think betrayal is a single, violent act, an affair, a public humiliation. But the deepest betrayals are the ones we slowly, quietly commit against ourselves to keep a peace that was never really peaceful to begin with. That night at Aria, the pain was a catalyst. It was the deafening alarm bell that finally woke me up. And I've learned that sometimes you need a moment like that. A moment so shattering it forces you to look at the rubble of your life and finally ask yourself, what was the foundation even made of? Was it ever truly solid? For me, the answer was no. The foundation I had built my life on was their approval, their acceptance, and it was made of sand. The real foundation, the one made of stone, was the one I had been building in secret all along Aria. It started as my refuge, a place to pour all the parts of myself I wasn't allowed to show at home. But when everything else fell apart, my secret project became my fortress. It became my proof of worth, not just to them, but to myself. And I think that's a lesson for everyone, no matter what your story is. Invest in your own Aria. Whether it's a skill, a secret passion, a small business, or just a deeply held belief, build something that is unapologetically yours. Nurture it, protect it, because one day it might be the very thing that saves you. The road after that night was about more than just winning a legal battle. It was about reclamation. My victory wasn't the moment the Hayes family was humbled. It was the moment I realized their opinion no longer mattered. It wasn't about revenge. It was about renovation, tearing my own life down to the studs and redesigning it from a place of authenticity and strength, which leads me to the one truth I hold on to from all of this. Sometimes the most important blueprint you will ever get to design is for your own life, and it is never ever too late to begin construction. But that's my story. I'm curious to hear what you think. Do you believe the biggest betrayals are the loud, obvious ones, or the quiet compromises we make against ourselves over time? And what does winning really look like after a deep loss? Is it about seeing the other side fall, or is it about the quiet satisfaction of your own success? If this story made you think, or if you have a completely different opinion, please share it in the comments below. I'd love to read your perspective. And if you enjoy exploring complex stories about strength, resilience, and the art of rebuilding, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story we share. Thank you for listening.